So I have a question for you. If you were given the choice to go up or down when you pass, which would you pick? Okay, so yeah, it seems like a bit of a loaded question, and more importantly, your answer was probably informed by whatever religious or non-religious beliefs you subscribe to. However, I'd guess that a majority of you, much like myself, would initially choose up, as this is generally accepted as the good place and down as the bad place. Now, I'd like you to think about how you might struggle with answering that question if you had no preconceived notions on which was the right choice. Would you pick one arbitrarily and stick with it until your time? Would you chop and change throughout your life? What about if your loved ones disagreed with you? Would you change to go where they go? Obviously, there's no correct answers here, but it is interesting to think about, no? How Fish is Made, developed by Wrong Organ and released in 2022, explores this through the lens of a short horror game where you were a fish faced with a simple choice: up or down. It's more than that though. Yes, the core gameplay is fairly rudimentary, but it's a game that has something to say, and presents it under a surreal and repulsive veneer, which is where the horror comes in. Well, that and the existential dread, I guess. But before we fully dive in, let me just say that this game is entirely story-based and I will be spoiling the whole thing, so if you'd like to experience it for yourself, which I highly recommend, I suggest you go and do that now. The game's free and it takes like 20 minutes to play through. That said, there is a trypophobia warning. I'll be censoring it in this video, but just play at your own caution. With that said, let's get into it. So the game begins with us falling down what appears to be a vent of some kind, and into an industrial metal room with a single fish in it, and one way to proceed. After getting our bearings, we talk to our new friend who greets us before quickly getting to that oh so important question that drives the narrative. Tell me, are you going up or down? You'll have to make up your mind by the end. He says that even the oiliest of us have to make the choice. Now, a few fish here refer to themselves as oily throughout the game, seemingly as a positive. Oily, therefore, appears to be a symbol of status in the fish world. Granted, I could be wrong, I'm not a fish. Anyway, we make our choice. Seeing as I'm pretty agnostic, yes I know it's boring, you can stop booing me now, I choose up. I mean, surely up has to be the right answer, right? In response, our new fish friend simply asks if we're sure, and doesn't elaborate on where he's headed. Also, I'm not sure if I'm the only one who feels this, but it almost seems like he judges us for our choice. We head forward, but not before the fish stops us and warns us that the machine can't talk to you, and not to bother talking to it. I wonder what he could mean by that. We head down the hall, which is a rusty red colour, complete with grated floors and a dripping ceiling. It's pretty much Silent Hill in here. This leads us to our next room, which contains two fish. We approach the first, who's flapping around. They tell us emphatically that the right way is up, even using a classic manipulation tactic. They tell us that we look smart, and therefore we should know that the way is up. They also say that they've never questioned it, never changed their mind, and never lied about their beliefs. They then ask us, up or down? Well, I'm nothing if not consistent. Gotta be up. In response to this, if we can call it a response, the fish simply states, the water has it wrong, the flesh has it wrong. Everything goes up in the end. The fish on the other side of the room, however, has different beliefs. Sat inside discarded plastic six-pack rings, he tells us not to be foiled by the other fish, and calls him lost. We can only poetry them, he says. Okay. The rings he's trapped in, to him, are, and I quote, his throne of inspiration. He tells us the story of how one day it just stuck to him, like his ideas, almost as if chosen, complete and undentable, he says, stating that it's proof of his most oily brain. There's that word again. He tells us that he knows with certainty, after lots of thinking, which way is correct, as he is burdened with the ideas just coming to him. He asks us if we'd like to know, as it might change our word view. Before we can answer, he tells us anyway. It's down. And just as he's about to tell us why it's down, the fish stops himself and explains that it's too complex to fathom. So by now, two things should be clear about this fish. One, he thinks he's very clever. And two, he really kinda isn't. You might have noticed when I was quoting him, or maybe on the screen, that despite literally referring to himself as a sage, he actually says quite a lot of words wrong. He says foiled instead of fooled, undentable instead of undeniable, and wordview instead of worldview. That's not even all the mistakes he makes. Which begs the question, does this guy really know what he's talking about? I mean, he's stuck in literal rubbish, but we'll come back to this later. We head down another hallway, this one with a large fan. At the end we can see a room containing a fleshy hole, which without a doubt is where we're headed next. The fan's shadow looms over us as we approach. When we reach the next room, we find a fish in the corner cowering. He doesn't have a lot to say other than pointing us in the right direction, so we head right on down. As we fall into the fleshy tube, it presents an image of us being eaten as we descend further into wherever it is we've found ourselves. On the other end, we're back in another cold metal room. This one has 2 fish in it again. This time, only one is still with us. One fish, dead, stuck in some sort of translucent substance, almost looking like a spotlight cast from above. The other looking on in awe, trying to discern some meaning in it. The living fish, in his rant about the meaning of it all, states that there has to be a way out of this creature's stomach. He then asks us what it all reveals, with our options being, you guessed it, up or down. Up, we say confidently. However, the fish disagrees, now stating that he sees it as revealing it is down. Okay mate, crazy how you didn't know 5 minutes ago, but now suddenly I'm wrong. Down yet another hallway, we find a fish stuck in some gears. He too refers to the place we're in as a creature that swallowed us. Unfortunately, we can't progress without pushing the ominous giant red button. And, well...
No, stop! What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing with your life? No! Oh my god! No!
Yikes. We press on, the area becoming shrouded in shadows, with the floor glowing red, until we enter a large chamber, almost like a stomach. On exiting, which we do ASAP, the next hallway is much more industrial and non-organic, which leads us to perhaps the weirdest interaction in the game. Here we find a lone fish, except wait, the fish isn't the one that we're talking to. Instead, it's a parasite that has eaten and replaced the tongue of the fish, and is using him to speak to us. And guys, it's my displeasure, by the way, to inform you that these do actually exist, and are called tongue-eating lice. They enter through gills, eat the host's tongue, and live there. What a lovely world we live in. Silver lining, they can't harm us, so that's neat. Anyway, he speaks for the fish, saying how much of a good team they are. Yeah, not so sure about that, buddy. He then gets what he calls the most brilliant of ideas, and naturally bursts into song. I'm not going to show you the entire thing, as there's a lot of gross parasite imagery in the back. But this is definitely the weirdest part of the game for me, and that's saying a lot. Now, is it a coincidence that the literal parasite tries to motivate us and talks to us about teamwork about as much as a middle manager would? Probably not. But honestly, I didn't find that this sequence really factored into the game's overall message, or at least what I got out of it. So let's move on. On leaving this room, the environment becomes organic again, with fleshy walls and bones for beams. We enter a large chamber filled with dead fish in what appears to be a shower, circling the centre of the room. The next part of the game is going to be mostly censored, not because of gore or anything else NSFW, just because it's a bit of a trypophobia trigger, and I know a lot of people hate that kind of thing. The next room's filled with maggot larvae burrowed into holes. Lovely stuff. Why do you deserve it? Will you be able to live without it? Try and try and try and try and try again. Those double action hinges have always been there just for you, right? You'll come back. Everyone does. Weak. Or you'll go looking one way or another, right? Weak. So, this monologue puzzled me for a few reasons. I mean, I don't even know who's talking really. Is it the maggots? I thought about it, and I think the key for me was the mention of the double action hinges, as in a hinge that allows a door to open either way, or in two ways, much like how in this game there are two ways. Why do we deserve it? Will we be able to live without it? I believe the it in question is choice. The choice. And then it gets a bit meta with the you'll come back and about us looking one way or another. I think this refers to our choice of up or down. We'll come back, as in play the game again to see the other ending, or maybe go looking, as in search up what happens. The game is calling us weak because we're not committing to our choice, and instead are able to peek at both. After this, we find ourselves in the penultimate room, lights turning on as we continue along the walkway. In our path is a fish who says, "It is time. Choose." And we choose, like we have several times before. He then proceeds to tell us it's not the outcome that is the gift, but instead the ability to make a choice. And further, about how choice itself doesn't actually matter, but instead our conviction and commitment to it. Which I guess puts a very definitive meaning to the game, which kind of renders this whole video pointless, I guess. Well, until he tells us that he was lying and that he's just another fish in a big important looking room. Honestly, while this is quite funny, I do believe there is actually some meaning in what this fish said, even if he himself didn't quite mean it. In the final hallway, we turn a corner to find the last fish. Faced with the final room and the final choice to be made, he's scared out of his wits, quite understandably. He tells us he's counted how many fish have gone up and how many have gone down, and asks us if we'd like him to tell us. Unlike Super Genius from earlier, he waits for a response. And before we go any further, I'd like you to think back to the question I posed at the start of the video. Would you go up or down? Which do you think more fish choose? The fish tells us his stats by his count. 199 up, 474 down. But that makes no sense, right? Who would want to go down? Anyway, with this said, we talk to him again, and he offers to go first and yell loud so we can hear how it is on the other side. He asks us for the final time, which way are we headed? Up. True to his word, he goes on ahead of us, yelling and describing the other side as soft. Honestly, what a legend. With that over, we are left with nothing but silence as we approach the end and our final choice. Up or down? From the beginning we said we'd be going up. So when faced with the choice, we stick to our guns and head right, which leads us up into darkness until the screen goes black. You know, I always hated hearing, "Don't worry, a lot of people are going through the same thing. You're not alone." There's this selfish barbed wire inside my chest that coils up at that. No, my pain is more tragic, grander, deeper, if only you knew. That's not true, of course. I hate talking about it. Because I hate people who talk about it. And that's not very nice. That's not okay. That's not how you can be about all this. It's not romantic, but at least it's true. Don't worry. A lot of people are going through the same thing. And that's what makes it the best USP yet. Thanks for playing. On going up, we find that we've become one with a mass of other fish who made the same choice. Writhing and wailing, unable to accomplish anything. As with all the amalgamated minds, no decision can be made. And that's it. You become a useless flesh pile, or at least part of one. Or as the game puts it, a swelling god of no purpose. So, did we choose wrong? Was up not the correct choice? And this our punishment for committing to it so vehemently? Well, to find out, and as the maggots from earlier predicted, I reloaded and played the entire game again to see what was on the other side of door number 2. This time, upon reaching our final decision, we chose down. It must be the correct answer. I mean, surely it has to be better than the flesh pile, right? We end up a sandwich. A sandwich? How is this any better? Well, firstly, it's not. Well, not for the fish. I mean, it's easier on the eyes, I guess. So, up or down, did it really matter in the end? No, it didn't. Either way, you end up in a less than stellar situation. But I actually think this is perfect and fits the theme of the game perfectly. So, now that we've played both endings, what is How Fish is Made trying to say? Personally, I think there are 2 major themes that act as through lines for the game: choice and religion. Starting with religion, the whole idea of up or down is fundamentally intertwined with religious ideas of the afterlife. No matter which way you cut it, for the vast majority of people, at least in the Western world, the idea of up or down is gonna immediately make them think of heaven or hell. Furthermore, the various fish you meet along the way, to me at least, represent the various ways some people treat their beliefs, and how this can affect the way we talk about these things with others. It's important to remember that none of the fish along the way know for themselves which way is the right way, but so many insinuate or even outright tell you that their way is correct. For instance, the 2 in the second room. The smaller fish even tells you that he simply believes up to be the way, blindly following his ideas. No more informed is the fish across the room, stuck in plastic. While he claims to be enlightened, he's clearly deluded, at least as far as his intelligence goes. And then there's the fish at the end, who counts those who go before him, almost attempting to take a scientific approach. However, this ends up being useless, as how can simple statistics provide solutions to problems of faith and belief? And don't even get me started on the guy who couldn't make up his mind but then blindly chose to just disagree with you for no reason in the room with the 1 dead fish and the 1 alive fish. Now, it's important to remember that this is not a blanket statement for religion as a whole, and potentially belief would be a better way of linking all this together. There are also several fish who refer to the environment as being alive, personifying it. Some even saying that we've been swallowed by it. And they're not wrong to think that, as mixed in with the rusted factorial rooms are biological and fleshy chambers. We could well be inside a big animal. For me, this, in conjunction with the religious overtones, suggests the idea of a giant creature having eaten us, and that the purgatory we're stuck in is in fact the inside of a beast, was a parallel to God. Having just read that, I realised how bad of a run-on sentence that was, but just work with me. That's not to say that we are actually in a god, but more that the personification of the environment and that only some fish believe that the place we're in are alive is at least thematically linked with the idea of a god, as in a large being with power over life and death that's beyond our comprehension. Admittedly, this is a loose connection, but I couldn't make any other rational link between what the fish could be talking about with this. What do you guys think? Feel free to let me know. As I mentioned before, the theme of choice is also key to understanding how fish is made. Throughout the game, various fish ask you which way you're going, up or down. You can commit like I did, change your answer every time, change at the last minute. I mean, you can even say for the whole game that you're going to go one way, only to choose the other when the time comes. Your choices throughout the game do not affect anything really. And then there's the endings. Neither of them are the right choice, as you either end up dead or wishing that you were. Ultimately, this choice is meaningless too. So then I'd pose the question as to whether your choices matter at all. And I think this is the point. Because despite claiming to have been essentially pranking us, the penultimate fish does say some really important dialogue that really frames this point nicely. He says that the choices themselves are the important thing, not the outcomes. The freedom to choose is more important than the consequence. This is supported when he says that the game is not about making the right choices, but instead committing to the ones that you make. Conviction. The idea of choices being more important than outcomes is also reflected back in the religious side of the game, as I would argue that the game is basically saying that it's not about up or down, getting into heaven or hell. It's about the choices you make along the way, your life. Ultimately, it is also a silly game about fish, with a dance number by a literal parasite, so maybe I could be overthinking this. Regardless, I think how Fish is Made is great, and Wrong Organ did a great job here between the core message to how it's reflected in the gruesome visuals. Either way, glad we could wrap this up. I've clearly rinsed this game for all it has. Oh, there's a DLC. The DLC, or The Last One and Then Another, is closer to a horrific Katamari game than the base game, as you roll around and collect fishy bits to increase your size and consume other fish. Frankly, I don't want to spend too much time analysing the DLC, as not only does the base game sum up its themes perfectly, but the DLC doesn't really share the same core themes at all. In fact, I'd argue the DLC has a lot more of an anti-capitalist message than one related to religion. I mean, even the name, The Last One and Then Another, is clearly related to endless consumption, which is then reflected in the gameplay, where the aim is to get big enough to eventually consume the final target. Which brings me to the other reason that I struggle to analyse this section of the game. The DLC is kinda just a playable teaser for Wrong Organ's bigger game, Mouthwashing. Oh hey Curly, how's it hanging, buddy? Thanks for reminding me that this is in fact still a horror game. Jesus. Like, I could discuss how some of Curly's dialogue is relating to the themes I just mentioned, but we're now aware that some of what he says is actually just foreshadowing for the story of Mouthwashing, which is cool, but unrelated to how Fish is made. So, do you agree with any of what I said, or do you think I'm wrong about literally everything? Feel free to let me know your thoughts below. I read all my comments. If you'd like to support me, please like and subscribe, it means the world to me. It also lets me know that you like this kind of content, so I can make more. And with all that said, I think we're done here. Hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye bye.